The other thing I wanted to discuss on this show was Stacy, you had tweeted out that let me bring this up.
Oh, yes. And the president retweeted me.
Yes, which was really awesome. The tourism.
Oh, no. I thought
Which one were you talking about? The Barclays one?
Yeah. The tourism. Read the tourism one, because that was good.
The tourism
and I
one.
won't send a DMCA takedown notice.
Yeah, so this is the president.
One last tweet.
Yes, and he put out in Spanish and in English about how tourism is up 35%, and you put tourism in El Salvador is booming. First, President Bukele made Bitcoin legal tender. This attracted global media attention onto the small country and set in motion the greatest rebrand in history. Which that right there, that moment right there attracted the Bitcoin tourists. Just, everyone who wanted to see what this was like. One of the reasons you guys came here, correct?
Yes, true. Yes. The very first wave of tourists were Bitcoiners, basically coming to see what was going on.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Like the Beverly Hillbillies. The Bitcoin. They came in there with Jed and Mary Lou, and they were in the cement swimming pool. Yeah, it was beautiful.
Because back in 2021, remember, this was before the gang war. So it was still like when we first flew there, and I Googled it from the runway, they said, this is the most dangerous country on earth, don't go. And I mean, I was scared, but you do anything for Bitcoin, right? So, I overcame my fear and we went. But this new wave of tourists, there's still a lot of Bitcoin tourists. There are actually even more, I would say, Bitcoin exiles, people actually moving there. Yeah. And because, the global media cannot stop talking about President Bukele, a lot of people around the world then hear about El Salvador for the first time. And then they see the images and they see how cool it looks. They see the leader looks cool. They see the country looks cool. The waves look awesome. The volcanoes look beautiful. And so they start to think, the news is saying it's safe. It's the safest country in the Western Hemisphere by far, but at a cost. And nobody cares about that, right? They know all the tourists are like, I want to go to those beaches and it's safe. Let's go.
The cost is your reputation, journalist man who insists on reporting fake news about El Salvador. That's the cost.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm one of those people. I mean, at first I commend you and anybody who came here before Bukele made the country safe. Like that was gutsy. It was a year ago. Was it like last March or April is when I started seeing both, Stacy, you and Max's tweets about it's now safe. And that report had come out about a year ago saying it was the safest country in Latin America. And I started following some other Bitcoiners that were down here, notably Sandy Waves, who's a Bitcoin tourist, a tour guide. And I was like, I got to see for myself, because again, I don't trust the mainstream corporate media saying whatever, Bukele is blah, blah, blah. I don't trust them. I'm a Bitcoiner. I trust it. So I verify. I don't trust, I verify. So I came down here, and anybody who's watching this, if you go to my YouTube channel, I have a whole El Salvador playlist, and you can see me interviewing people, like going into formerly bad neighborhoods and how safe they are, interviewing El Salvadorians, telling me their story, why they came down here. And it's like, I personally feel safer here than I do in the United States.
Well, that's the don't trust, verify sort of factor of Bitcoin, because, everybody in Bitcoin, most people in Bitcoin know the Keiser report. They might have learned about it on the Keiser report, or certainly watched a lot of our interviews with Bitcoiners and coverage of Bitcoin over the years since 2011. So when they saw me and Max there in El Salvador, not just for a week or 2 weeks or 2 months or 3 months or 5 months or 6 months. Like, we were there for month after month after month after month for now 2.5 years. And that was their verification. They started to verify, okay, well, it must be worth at least a visit, right? Let's go see for ourselves, because we know them. We've been watching them for 10, 15 years. And so we'll go verify for ourselves that, we trust them, but we're going to go verify. So, that was the first wave, was those Bitcoiners. But I would say, again, like that more of them are actually moving there now than.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of people are now moving. The idea, the seed was planted, and then a year, 2 years later, it's growing, and the situation wherever the country you're in is getting worse. And you do it, man. You make the move.
We were we just visited a location here in North Carolina where they repair ASICs, right? And it's been operating since 2016. And the guy who runs it, Gerald, he came down to El Salvador in early February for 2 nights, 3 days. And now he's moving there. He's moving there next week. He was only there for 2 days, 3 days. So he's moving to El Salvador. And this is a common thing, right? It's, how that feeling when you're hanging out with your friends at Bitcoin conferences? It's like that across the whole country. You have all this space to, climb volcanoes, surf in the waves.
Yeah, that's what you do when you're young. I mean, I visited Paris when I was 30 years old, was going to a party there, fell in love with it. I called my office a week later and resigned and never returned to the United States for 5 years because I just loved it so much. I think this is having the similar impact on people. They come to El Salvador and it really is remarkable. We came up with an idea. I think Stacy really thought of this idea where you remove the violence, and what's underneath the violence are people who are very friendly, very nice, and they're very outgoing, and they're just very, very nice people. So it removed the layer of violence, and underneath are just peace-loving, fun people.
Yeah, the thing I noticed too is when I first came down here last June, I was introduced. Sandy Waves introduced me to all these Bitcoiners, and everyone was in some version of. Either they had already come down before and now they were moving here, or they were visiting like me, or one person came down and then they went back and got their wife and kids and were like, we're moving here and let's work on projects. I interviewed all these cool people like Quentin and his girlfriend at Bitcoin Island, La Playa, who are now helping create all the cool stuff that's happening in Berlin, which is Bitcoin City. And everyone was like, how do we get involved and how do we. And like you say, the El Salvadorian people are so nice and friendly and welcoming, and they're like their pride now that they have. Like I was interviewing Ronnie on Monday, who created the Bitcoin hardware store in El Zonte, and he's like Salvadorian, and he goes, Salvadorians didn't used to. We were sort of looked down in the Latin American community as this violent country. And he goes, now we have all this pride. And when I speak to people from other Latin American countries, they're all like, man, we got to get a Bukele here in fill in the blank, Costa Rica, Mexico, Guatemala, whatever. And I'm noticing that I've been traveling around this country. We went to the Tazamal, the Mayan ruins on Saturday of several Bitcoiners. We all went there. And then we went to Santa Ana to go to this beautiful Catholic church. I lit a candle for my Irish Catholic grandmother. I hope she's watching from heaven. And it was this beautiful, like we saw two amazing things within a 2 hour, hour and a half drive of San Salvador. And everyone was like, there were 3 of us that are all like living here. And then there was a young kid who was just visiting. And he's like, man, I got to figure out how to make this. Well, you come down here, you see it, you verify, and then you go, how do I make this work? Like, how do I make this happen?
Which is in 21 and first half of 2022, especially, because remember the gang war didn't start until the very end of March. Max and I used to do these live events in order to give people an excuse to fly across the world to come to the event, right? How do you get somebody from Norway or India to fly that huge distance? Well, this was a good reason to go. Like, okay, there's this event. we'll go to the event, and we know Max and Stacy are going to be there, and it's a public event, and they're happy to be in this public space, whatever the space is. We don't know what El Salvador is like, but if they're going to be there, then it must be safe, right? They're there, living there. And so we used to have to do those events in order to get all the Bitcoiners to come. And then they came, and there would be up to 300, 400 people at a time from all over the world flying in for those. The last like really big one we had, I think it was when maybe it was Jeff Booth speaking there. I forget who was on stage with us, but it was like maybe 3 weeks, maybe 2 weeks even after the gang war started. Remember that? And that was down in El Zonte, and there were already people booked, right? So we had to go through with the event because people were flying in from all over the world for it. But we, all of those people that came, then they tweeted or they reported or they blogged or they posted videos and said great things. And then their friends saw it, and their friends came to El Salvador, and the compounding effect of that, of more and more people seeing for themselves what El Salvador was like. Like there's no, all you have to do is get somebody to come visit, and they can see for themselves.
Last Friday, the Bitcoin Beach did its monthly meetup in El Zonte, and Chimbera asked me to speak, and it was so cool. So Lena spoke, who's been on this show. Mauricio, the Minister of Education, spoke, who's been on this show. I spoke, and in the audience, and I've been to that meetup a couple of times, it was so cool. There was some of the people I knew, like Bitcoiners that live here. And then there were people, they went around, who's new? And people were like, I'm from Germany, I'm from Boston, I'm from New Jersey, like all over the world. And, some people were like diehard, orange pill people. Some people were just sort of like, I'm kind of new to this, I don't know, but they're like wanting to learn about it. And everyone there's such an excitement. And so it was so cool. We hung out. There was a DJ I met from Canada, and he wants to come down here and open up like a Bitcoin nightclub, because everyone's like, how do I bring my thing, which is so cool. And it's one of the things you guys first told me when we met, when I was here in June. I'm like, what does this country need? And you're like, everything. And so everyone's like, okay, what can I bring? And it's such a cool vibe. So then yesterday I was using the Bitcoin Beach co-working space, which is a fantastic space in El Zonte. It's and because the power was out in El Tunco where I was living. So I was like, I got to go, and it's this cool space. And then afterwards I'm just walking on the beach, and this guy comes up to me, and he's like, introduces himself, and he's from Germany, and he runs the Bitcoin Hotel in Austria. This like Bitcoin only hotel. And he's like, you got to guys come do your Orange Pill podcast there. So I'm just kind of pitching you guys here during the live stream that we need to go do this live in Austria. That energy is so cool. I mean, he's like, he's from Germany. I'm, from Chicago and LA, and now we're all here connecting. And it's just this like amazing stuff that's happening. And it's really, El Salvador is like the capital or the crossroads or the touch point, and people are coming here and they're either moving here or they're getting inspired to set up something cool where they live. And that's what's amazing. And this is like, it's becoming this Mecca. Like if you're a Bitcoiner, you have to make a pilgrimage here. You have to come here.
Yeah, but the tourism is up 35% this year so far on last year's number, and last year's numbers were all-time record highs. So that's more than just Bitcoin. That is like Bitcoin definitely sparked that, because it was President Bukele making Bitcoin legal tender that caused the most expensive media in the world to start to talk about him incessantly, right? The Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. They gave many column inches every single week to covering him obsessively and saying why this was a bad idea, mostly, right? About the Bitcoin legal tender. And this was before the gang war. And then they, stepped up again with more hate and FUD. But there was so much FUD about Bitcoin, but they kept on covering it, and they kept putting headlines. El Salvador is president, El Salvador is president, El Salvador, El Salvador, El Salvador, El Salvador. So like, it's in the mind. It starts seeping into the brain of people all over the world in all sorts of industries and all sorts of, you know, realities that they might not have ever heard of or given any thought at all to El Salvador. But because of him doing such a unique thing of making Bitcoin legal tender, it gave a huge amount of column inches to a little tiny country. And they got to, you know, it was like an asymmetric bet that paid off financially, economically, and culturally, and with tourism, right?
It's like Lourdes in France. You know, people go there for the healing waters. It's taken on a new significance. It's just not tourism like, oh, let's do some TikTok videos and get in the bikini. You know, it's healing. You know, you touch the volcano acid and the rocks, and they transform you, and you become one with the Bitcoin singularity. And President Bukele is beaming down from the heavens and from his home, and it's stirring the emotions, and people find that they've never felt this good in their life.
Yes.
It's so funny. I'm noticing that. So I live in El Tunco, which is it's a surf town. It's a lot of tourists there. And I've met a lot of these people that are tourists just because they heard about it's safe now. They're not even necessarily Bitcoiners. They're like, I'm here for the surfing. And a lot of them I've noticed, they're like surf tourists who like, oh yeah, man, we're going to hit, you know, we were in Costa Rica, we're surfing Nicaragua. And then they come to El Salvador, and their plan was to just maybe come and surf for like 4 or 5 days in El Salvador. And they're all like, man, I'm staying longer. Like all of them just go, this vibe here, those other countries are cool and everything, but they're like, man, the vibe here is so much cooler because as Max said earlier in this, the fact that Salvadorians now feel safe, there isn't, you know, in these other countries, you have to kind of watch your wallet and kind of, you know, you got to like play that head on a swivel thing out. You don't have to here. Like you literally are like, no, it's safe. It's cool. I'm seeing people ride their bikes around, just lean their bike up against something. No one's locking their bikes. Like
But
that's,
I think the new safety, I think the thing that is really altering everything is that when you take the decision and you fly and you land in El Salvador, the one thing that is infectious that really makes you fall in love is the people.
Yeah.
And part of that is because a lot of that is due to the fact that here is a population that lived for 50 years under brutal civil war, followed by brutal gang war. So they've been totally liberated, and not just liberated by some outside force, but by their own leader that they elected, who is also super fucking cool. And everybody in the world wants him to be their leader too. So you emerge into you're liberated by that guy who everybody thinks is the coolest guy in the world. And like, you get to be cool suddenly and free, like not just free, but cool, not just cool, but free. Like you get to be all of that. Right. And you see that in the people themselves, the population all around you. Like they're just, you know, the first 6 months to 12 months, you know, they were still cautious, right? Mm-hmm. They had been liberated, but everything was still cautious. And certainly the global media was throwing so much hard FUD at them because it wasn't obvious. At the point when it wasn't obvious about just what a resounding success the regime of the exception regime was, there was still a lot of FUD being thrown at the country. But now, I mean, wow, like people have forgotten the bad times. They don't believe those bad times are coming back. They know the good times are just getting started, that this is just the beginning. And you see that in the people that like, hot diggity dog, like this shit is getting great. Like our lives are amazing. And we're the coolest people in Latin America and in the world.
So true. Cool, free and cool.
Free and cool.
So since, you know, Bukele put that out there, and Stacy, you retweeted it about the 35% increase. And as you both pointed out, this is just, and there was an all-time high last year. So they've already And with all of the improvements that are being made, I mean, there's surf competitions that are coming that were here last. The Miss Universe was here. They have new stadiums and stuff like that being built. And as they just constantly are improving the infrastructure, where do you see, like, what are some of the next levels of tourism and some of the things that are happening in this country that you can like look to as like, oh, when this happens, or, get ready, the numbers are only going to keep going up. Like, how do you project that?
Well, just like with Bitcoin and stuff, we were very, very early in Bitcoin. We're very early in El Salvador, and the sort of natural, like I said, the first wave of tourists was Bitcoiners, and Bitcoiners are a little bit more honey badger than most. They came before the gang war, before the security was, and before peace came. Then you have the more adventurous travelers now. But you're going to start to see, and we know some of them are coming, like really, really big superstar names, like whether they're movie stars or, big titans of industry, like really famous names coming. That's what I think you'll see next.
Yeah, I think, you should see, like, in development of another area, I guess in the east, toward La Union, they're going to be building an airport there, and Bitcoin City. So once you have more than just a couple of hotspots, right? You've got San Salvador and you've got El Zonte, El Tuco, where you are. Those are like two hotspots. And then you add another airport on the east and Bitcoin City, and then people will be staying and really moving all over the country. And I think that's, going to grow it that way. You're going to grow it. So you're traveling, they're building all the roads, they're building the infrastructure. They're as fast as they can grow the infrastructure, they're going to get more and more tourists, right? They're going to get more cruise ships. I mean, 2 years ago, 0 cruise ships went to El Salvador. Last year, 1 cruise ship came in from Norwegian Cruise Line. This year, I think last I looked, they're scheduling 10 cruise ships coming in. Each one of those ships has 2,000 to 3,000 people. And where they pull in, I haven't seen the actual facility, but I'm the way it's been described to me, it's also a working industrial port. So I'm not sure it's like it's been built up as a great, like Miami or someplace like that. That's such a great place to pull in with your huge cruise ship. But I'm sure that'll be coming. And then you come in on the cruise, and then you leave in the air. You go to the airport, you fly to somewhere else, you come back. You got to build the infrastructure. So the president has said that there's lots of money if you don't steal it. He's everyone else in the world steals the money. Liz Warren or Nancy Pelosi, right? They can't steal it fast enough. Here, the president's just saying, let it all drop at the bottom line, and we'll just plow it back into infrastructure because I'm a madman like that.
Yeah, I mean, you bring a great point. Like I said, a year ago when that guy broke into the Pelosi's home, I said, well, that's one way to stop insider trading, because the Pelosi's are worth hundreds of millions of dollars from insider. Like everyone in Congress and the Senate just about has gotten, they buy a bunch of stock, then they pass some bill that benefits that sector, and then, oh, hey, look, they're millionaires. Like, oh, what a wacky coincidence. And it is amazing when, like you say, when everyone isn't stealing and there isn't corruption, there's money for all of this. Yeah, so it's only going to go up. There's only going to be more international events and sporting events and concerts. I mean, that's what's coming to next, I think, is a big concert venue.
Yeah, let me jump in here for a second. Bukele has made politics great again. There's this meme, particularly in the US and other countries, that all politics suck and only the private sector can do anything. Elon Musk can send a rocket to the moon and NASA sucks. But in El Salvador, all this great stuff we're talking about is brought to you by the government, right? It's the government that's doing all this great stuff. And as I said, I think on the last show, President Bukele is like reinventing something that has been moribund for 2,500 years, the idea of politics and having a functioning government. There's a real functioning philosophical question about the social contract and the need for an organizing principle called the government. And that, unfortunately, as you point out, in America and Washington, D.C., it's been being gamed by midwits and folks who couldn't make it in Hollywood or can't hit a fastball, so they steal money as politicians, and the results are catastrophic, as we've seen it. But it doesn't necessarily reflect negative on the idea of governance. After all, Bitcoin is the most governed thing in the universe.
Yeah, it's yeah. We touched on it a couple weeks ago. Just like it has the inspiration that like JFK had. Like he inspired people to like get involved and be a part of things. And of course, he wasn't allowed to do anything because he said famously we should break the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the wind. And what Bukele is doing is he's inspiring people to like get involved and be, like you say, we couldn't be here if it wasn't for him and his government, the New Ideas Party, passing. It shows you that like when government's done correctly, wonderful things can happen. I mean, I'm here.
It's called leadership and statesmanship. Yeah. And we must answer Max Trotter's question. Max Trotter is an OG Orange Pill fan. He's been in the audience for many years, and he's asking if there's any snooker in El Salvador. The important question.
No, there's no snooker, and we'll get Ronnie O'Sullivan down there to launch a snooker, league, and bring about some championship snooker to El Salvador. So that definitely what we definitely were missing. Some snooker.
What you need is a snooker hall, and they will come. The snooker players will come.
Yeah, they'll definitely show up. It's a great sport. Ronnie O'Sullivan. No, not yet. Max Trotter, not yet.
Soon there's going to be snooker tournaments. Well, let's it's infectious too to be around people. And I was talking about this with this guy Mark, who runs the Bitcoin Hotel in Austria. It was his first time here, and when you're around, and when I call back to my friends in the States, there's always some like and it's like, wow, I forget just the 5 weeks I've been here. Every day I'm surrounded by positivity, and there's something you don't even realize it when you're in a place and everyone's like complaining and it sucks, and they have valid complaints and the rents and the inflation. And when you're like, I feel lighter, I feel better. My friends that talk to me back, they're like, God, you sound great. I'm like, yeah, man, I'm just laughing. We're talking all the cool stuff that's happening. I'm surfing, I'm doing yoga, I'm like working out, like it's great. And you don't realize how your surroundings, not just physical and geographical surroundings, but the people around you, how important that is. And you go to a Bitcoin meetup, you go to just hang out in El Salvador, you go hiking, you go see the volcano, you surf, and everyone's like cool, fun, and in a good vibe. Like it's infectious, and then it feeds on itself. Just like negativity can feed on itself, positivity can feed on itself. Yeah. And it's like, man, I love it.
Well, it's the cycles. It's those the fourth turning, right? As Max recently pointed out, the U.S. is heading into their fourth turning, or like in the early stages of it, whereas El Salvador has already had that, and they're exiting it. They're, the cycle, the good times create weak men create the bad times create the good strong men create good times. So we're in the strong men have created the good times that are just starting. And in the US, we've had weak money, weak men, and bad times are happening, right?
Yeah, a lot of people bring up the point that when Europe went into the dark ages, it was the age of light in Middle East, in Islam, and in that area of the world, it became the leadership. Alexandria. And so, we may be seeing this in the world today, is that El Salvador is now really the new beacon of hope and leading the world. I mean, it's in the old days, you would mount an army, you would invade a country, you would have a huge empire, but these days we live in this, cosmic consciousness, and it's about memes, and the way to galvanize following is through, this intellectual process that's rampant and running throughout our minds, and we're all connected electronically. So you don't need to have a large physical presence. El Salvador is a small country with only like 6-7 million population, but it could conceivably be a Goliath. It could be really just a massively important global leader that changes the world. Right now, the trajectory they're on that trajectory right now. That's where we're headed right now.
Yeah, and Max was just saying like you don't need to invade and steal lands, like, but the president has lived rent free in many minds, of important people around the world, and that has altered everything. Like that's like occupying mind space, right? Mind share.
Yeah, so it's mind share. It's the again, politics is being brought up just like Bitcoin has reinvented money for the electronic age. I think President Bukele has reinvented politics for the post central bank, post nation state era. And so now you have Bukele and Bitcoin, and they're together. And so the synergies there are really working on each other in a big way. And so people are like flocking, they're fleeing to El Salvador to escape the fiat money apocalypse, the fiat money dark ages. And this is happening right now.
The other thing too, you guys bring up great points, is so not only are people flocking here, but there's also now El Salvador is beginning to like spread the gospel. Like I was at a Meet Premier Bitcoin meetup. They have their curriculum now in 21 languages. They showed this map of the world, and I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like you guys, a bunch of them were just in Madeira and, which is in Portugal. Like, and the Salvadorians, when they arrive with Meet Premier Bitcoin or whatever at these other Bitcoin conferences around the world, they're greeted like conquering heroes. Like, oh, you're here from the promised land. Like you've touched the Rosetta Stone down there, and share with us. It's so amazing to watch.
Yes. And by the way, if you are a Swan Bitcoin, private wealth, private client, Max and I next week, we are going to be in Miami, and we're having some events like a private dinner and then a private meetup with Swan clients, Swan Bitcoin, swan.com. They managed to get swan.com /orange pill, because we're going to be in Miami talking about the promised land to their clients and talking about El Salvador and Bitcoin country. So
yeah, I think it's it's a limited number of tickets sold. I'm not even sure there's any tickets left. Yeah, I say teasingly.
I don't know if it's there's a ticket available. It's just like there's a certain number of seats at the table and seats in the
it's by invitation only, I think.
Invitation only. You have to be a Swan client.
You have to be a Swan private client. That's right.
Yes.
Swan is amazing. I've really, meeting Corey last year and interviewing him and going some of the Swan Salon private events in Los Angeles, I was like really impressed in that they're Bitcoin only. And again, anyone watching the show, especially if you're sort of new to the space and where do I go and this and that, go to swan.com /orange pill and you get 10 free dollars. And they're all about teaching you how to self-custody, and like they're a Bitcoin maxi place. So go there. You won't get caught up like Coinbase just went down or whatever, trying to convert to these shitcoin ETH fees or whatever nonsense is happening out there in that land.